I really appreciate it. It's hard to do quickly. Okay, our next speakers are Rupalim Bhuyan from the University of Toronto and Tenzin Chime, uh, who is also from the University of Toronto. And they're going to talk about transformative resilience through migrant-led collective action.
Great, thank you. So we'll do just a brief introduction again. So I'm Rupalim Bhuyan, working in the Faculty of Social Work. I'm currently in my mother's house in St. Louis, which is the territories of the Osage and Sioux, Sauk, many indigenous communities at the intersection of the Missouri rivers. So it's just lovely to join you all from here. And then Chime, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for this opportunity to speak on our project. Yeah, you can move to the next slide, Pauline.
Sure. So I'll just say briefly, so transformative, well, actually, Chime, you go and then I'll come back.
Okay, so we would like to begin with acknowledging that our research took place on Toronto, a Mohawk term for Toronto, which is a dish with one spoon territory whose original caretakers are the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit people. Personally, as a Tibetan in exile, I feel grateful that we have found a home on this land, but the sad irony of now living on another colonized land benefiting from the colonial project that Canada is, that obligates me to recognize my positionality on this land in relation to the Indigenous people here, its colonization and its decolonization. And I invite folks here today to do the same and think of our responsibilities to this land and people and think of how we can integrate them in the work that we do. So for today's presentation, we will use this outline to speak about our project and anchor our conversation on transformative migrant resilience. This is going to be a brief presentation, but for those who are interested in learning more, we have a research digest on this project that is available on the BMRC website. We also have 2 research reports coming out really soon, and they'll be distributed very soon. Yeah. Yeah, next slide.
Great. So, there's so much we can say, but this was a very grassroots research project, and we feel important to recognize there is ongoing and many histories of migrant organizing in the Toronto area. This long history of grassroots organizing is usually not very well documented and is usually not interwoven in our discussions about immigration. So we just want to keep that in mind as like our view of what we were able to pay attention to is just a snapshot of this. We also wanted to link with the city's motto, diversity is our strength. So the City of Toronto mobilizes this as their brand to attract people and many immigrants as well as investors. So we're keeping that diversity as our strength in mind as a kind of political project. In the context of over 50% of the residents of Toronto born outside of Canada, so immigrated in their lifetime. There is also dramatic segregation, racial and economic, just so painfully aware of in the pandemic, as we see the effects of the pandemic I'm gonna have to turn off my camera, I think, are particularly hard and life-threatening in these regions. And then as that dovetails as well with different forms of income inequality and precarious work. So these are kind of the backdrop of some of the context of our work, reaching out to migrants, organizing communities. We want to spend, although, I think previous presentations, I just hope we can run all of what they said, because we did not integrate as much the gender framework that was talked about, as well as the different forms of citizenship. We really wanted to talk about the inspiration of this project, which was the concept of transformative resilience. I was one of those people on the partnership that was suspicious of resilience and the neoliberal agenda that it is often performing. And this concept of transformative resilience was a way for us to think about the capacity within communities to not only adapt to, but resist systemic inequality facing and envision a world that's otherwise. And this is something I think we were able to capture, and we want to keep that in mind as an overarching framework for this project. We'll come back to that at the end. So this list of research and advocacy goals reflects the kind of collective vision. This was very much a participatory research project. It was initiated by myself and Yogendra, Shakir, the Access Alliance at the time, and many of the community partners who came together identified the need to bring visibility to community, migrant communities about the structural inequality they're facing, that the research would provide knowledge and support to enable migrant communities to build stronger networks, that there is a need to document this history of community organizing for the next generation, to practice solidarity, or even to learn how to practice solidarity better with other communities. These were things the migrant organizers shared with us as their intention. To also have our research showcase the contributions of migrant communities. I think we often, and myself included, adopt this deficit model that puts ourselves as researchers paying attention to the problems, which we need to do, but we often maybe sideline the incredible assets and strengths, take a Pollyanna view, but really want to see the work they're doing to address these inequalities and help them understand them better. And then, of course, show the transformative dimensions of collective action that go beyond assimilation and civic engagement. And I'd love to return to this in the discussion as well.
So the two case studies of our project are the Tibetan community in Parkdale and South Asian immigrant women in East Stanford. Tibetans are a relatively recent community in Toronto, as majority of them have immigrated to Canada as refugees in the past 15, 20 years. Toronto's Parkdale neighborhood, often referred to as the landing strip for immigrants and refugees due to its affordable housing, hosts the largest concentration of Tibetans in Canada who maintain close ties with each other due to their shared identity and lived experiences of exilehood. Majority of the South Asian immigrant women in East Stanford have immigrated from Bangladesh as economic migrants, and many experience employment barriers after settling in Canada. So South Asian immigrant women organize with other residents by going door to door to introduce themselves, build a sense of community, and empower women through helping them find decent work, childcare, and access to education. So in the summer of 2019, we conducted two focus groups, each with the leaders of the two case study communities. We also conducted 11 in-depth interviews with recognized grassroots community organizers working across the Greater Toronto area. So the migrant leaders that we spoke to in our project, they identified several cross-cutting issues that were shared across migrant communities in the GTA that were related to economic insecurity, racism, barriers in accessing resources and services. And in addition, there were issues that were specific to the communities that we studied. The Tibetan community in Toronto predominantly organizes for the Tibetan freedom struggle against the ongoing Chinese occupation of Tibet. The community leaders also spoke of the psychological toll of exilehood, as well as the urgency to preserve Tibetan culture and language in exile. Precarious immigration status is a pressing concern in the community, as Tibetans who are refused refugee status experience unique precarities due to their statelessness. Among the South Asian immigrant women, underemployment is a key concern shared by many members who, despite holding advanced degrees from their country of origin, face barriers in accessing professional employment in Canada and are forced to take up precarious jobs that are often characterized by unstable work hours, low wages, poor working conditions, and unfair treatment at work. Other key concerns that were shared were gender-based discrimination in the community, Islamophobia, social isolation, and stigma associated with poverty. So we wanted to understand how these migrant leaders that we spoke to first got involved in migrant organizing and what were the motivational factors that kept them engaged. For many migrant organizers, their lived experience of oppression and displacement was a starting point for them in getting involved. There was a sense of responsibility among them to secure a better future for the next generation. One of the common sentiments that we heard from the Tibetan community was, as a Tibetan, I should do something for Tibet, which speaks to the sense of obligation and purpose that people derived from just being a Tibetan. Next slide. So,
sorry, I didn't realize it was set up this way. Now you can see it.
yeah. So those were some of the themes that came up when we asked people, how did they first get into organizing?
We'll carry on. All right, I turned off my camera, folks, because of my internet. Hopefully you can hear me. This is just one of the things we are trying to understand is how this vision and the organizing goals, how people within these communities connect the concerns they're identifying with their organizing strategies, as well as with the goals of organizing. This is just a snapshot of the sentiment from some of the folks we met, in this case, the South Asian immigrant women we met with. They say in this quote, working as a group to identify from shared experience, to see similarities between our stories, what's good for us, what would be better to do for our future. And this is not necessarily new for those who study community organizing, but you can really see this happening organically, this connection between individual problems and connecting that as a way of understanding the structural conditions that people were facing. This is a snapshot of organizing strategies we identified from the Tibetan community folks we met with. It's not intended to be linear. I need to learn how to use the PowerPoint to take away the line, but this gives you an idea of some of the ways folks mobilized their knowledge, used some, and I use this word carefully, but indigenous forms of gathering. So for example, the kidug is a way that groups have formed in the diaspora to practice mutual aid and practice cultural traditions that are tied to the territories that they were from within Tibet, because it's a diverse territory. And these kidugs became a natural way for people to spread news, to get the word out, to show up, whether it be a rent strike or to raise money. So there are ways in which you tap into these natural networks. There was also ways that the geographic concentration of refugees from Tibet in Parkdale has been an asset. It also has become a site of struggle with gentrification and rising cost of living. So a lot of the activities have been to retain that physical presence because it's been such an important symbol of a home outside of Tibet for folks to gather. So this is just an idea of some of the organizing strategies. We also are playing around with visualizing how these goals and activities are intertwined. This concentric circle is intended to showcase how central the sentiment, how important it is that, you know, ending Chinese occupation of Tibet is to Tibetan identity in the diaspora. And within that overarching goal, almost everything is intertwined, whether that be supporting Tibetans in the diaspora in Canada or in other countries like in India and Nepal, whether it is building community within Canada, and then also addressing the social and economic needs that people have within Canada. And many of the activities that are showcased on the right dovetail into one or more of these overarching goals. I don't want to mean that Free Tibet is the only, but almost every conversation we had, it was vocalized as the primary concern, with some tension between generations or between different folks about where addressing current social, economic, or racial exclusion in Canada fits in. So when we think about substantive citizenship, I'm thinking about Alexandra's talk. Really, this goes beyond a particular nation state and has a much more transnational lens, especially when we think about colonization and ongoing colonization, both here in Turtle Island, as well as Chinese occupation of Tibet. A very different set of goals came out of our conversations with South Asian immigrant women who were organizing with a gender equity lens in mind. You have economic inclusion, you have community engagement and building a new society. Many of the activities had to do with labor conditions, labor rights, minimum wage, childcare, and also creating spaces for women to gather so that their concerns could be better understood and they had that power and strength. So I'm going over this quickly, but we can return to this later. Please, Chime.
So reflecting on some of the impacts of collective actions, migrant organizers shared how there is an increased political consciousness in the community and how people felt empowered after participating in collective actions. And this quotation beautifully captures some of those impacts, and I'll take a moment to read it really fast. People, when they participate in these collective actions, they see the power of many. They see that if we all stand together and we're all together, whether it's occupying somebody's office or blocking traffic or sealing off the Chinese consulate, there is power in numbers. There's strength in numbers, and it would not be the same if it was just one person, whatever the issue is. So I've seen people almost joyful after actions. We laugh, we joke around. You can visibly see people feel empowered if there's such a thing you can see. And when you come together, you realize that we're all connected. We're all affected by the same issues. So I think it makes a huge difference when people do participate in collective actions.
I know, Valerie, I just saw the chat. You want us to end. I'll say very quickly, and you can all look at our research digest. There were some of the lessons we took away, in particular that we really wanted to look at how transformative resilience is intertwined with individual and community resilience. I don't have the time, but we can come back to it in the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much, Rupaleen. And you need the whole